Hello, everybody!
Turn this up in our headphones, Charles.
Yes, mine too, please.
Everyone's getting it turned up today. All right. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friends, Charles.
That's right. Dylan is using the honorific of friends, plural, because with us today are Lilly and Sara from Fiction Fans. Hello, Lilly and Sara. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hello, nice to be here. Oh, and the secret fifth podcaster.
Mr. Squeak.
That's wow.
She has thoughts on Murderbot too.
Wow, didn't realize Mr. Squeak was going to make an appearance today. This is exciting.
Yeah,
welcome, guys. We're super thrilled to have you. We are big fans. Would you like to take a moment and introduce yourselves?
Sure, I'm Lilly. I am one half of Fiction Fans, a podcast where we talk about books and other words too, as the name might suggest. We have been doing some podcasting lately and quite enjoying it, and an excuse to read books is always good, which is really what it was at its core.
I'm Sarah. Lilly conned me into doing this podcast with her. I am the Twitter gremlin behind all of our incoherent Twitter tweets, and it is a good excuse to read books.
Yeah, that's kind of our excuse as well. We just needed an outlet for us to read some more fantasy books, but you guys cover the gambit. You don't just read fantasy novels. You read like all of a lot of speculative fiction, right?
It's
That's
not
true.
Yeah, it's not specifically fantasy, but we tend to veer towards fantasy.
Right.
We even have a cookbooks episode coming up soon, so keep an eye out for that.
That's exciting.
Yeah, Charles is big into cooking, right, Charles?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy cooking. I wouldn't say I'm talented or anything, but I'm definitely tuning into the cookbook episode. You guys are breaking new ground with that, at least in my experience. Gonna make me hungry.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's not the same without images, but we'll make it work.
Yeah, that's
Somehow.
true. That's true. I'm curious to see how you guys do. Are you gonna like read the recipes or like be like, hey, so I cooked this and here's how it went? What's the maybe you don't want to give away the secret before it airs. Like you may want to save that for your own show.
Well, I mean, we could tease it.
Yeah.
Like my cookbook is Heroes Feast, which is the Dungeons and Dragons cookbook. So there's quite a lot of other content in it.
Nice.
My cookbook is just a cookbook.
Well, we'll definitely be checking that out. So, by the way, this has felt like a really long time coming. I'm like super excited to have you two on here because, like, I've listened to all your episodes and we've had a lot of these interactions on Twitter. So I want to say I'm just super pumped. So, and Murderbot, All Systems Red, really excited to talk about that too. So, yeah. Welcome. This is awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, long time coming. And like you said, what a great choice for this. Oh my goodness. This book.
It was so good.
I'm glad to hear that because as I was reading, I'm like, I haven't read this, so I don't know. I trusted Dylan's judgment on this one because Dylan was the one that
always
pitched
a mistake.
Usually that's the case, but with fantasy and science fiction novels, I'm willing to go with it. And as I was reading it, I was like, okay, I know from listening to Fiction Fans that these two are Terry Pratchett fans. And as I was reading this, I'm like, okay, it balances that line. It's kind of satirical. It's kind of funny. It doesn't take itself too seriously. I think we're going to be safe with this one. So I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it.
Oh, right from the very first sentence. May I read the first sentence? That's not a spoiler, right?
Please do.
It's just a different version of audiobooking
Yeah.
at this point.
I could have become a mass murderer after I hacked my governor module, but then I realized I could access the combined feed of entertainment channels carried on the company satellites. I was hooked. First sentence. I was in. It says so much about the world and the character right away.
And the kind of humor that you're going to see in that novel, too.
For sure.
It's a perfect introduction.
Yeah, immediately grounds you in Murderbot's voice, which I feel like is the biggest thing that sticks out to me when I think about this novella. I mean, is there's such a distinct way that the prose works through the, we do, by the way, I guess I forgot to do my turn it down in your headphones if you haven't read All Systems Red at this point, because we will be spoilery. Yeah, we'll be spoiling it from here on out. But right away, we've got that first line, and it's got this Murderbot voice that is so unique, distinct, sort of quirky, funny. It goes on to say like that Murderbot's been watching 30,000 hours of the entertainment feed or something like that. So it's I knew as Terry Pratchett fans, like Charles was saying, that you two would appreciate how funny Murderbot is. I think there's a lot more depth to this book than that first line might convey per se, but and that's a Pratchett thing too, right? Like Pratchett has these really funny witticisms, and from what I've seen, there's also a lot of depth to his work. So I thought this would be a good fit. I was really happy when we were talking about the collab that you wanted to jump on for this one.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I think Sarah and I both went out and ordered the rest of the series the second we finished it.
Oh, I haven't yet, but I do intend to.
Fine. Close enough.
Well, I'm excited to see where y'all end up going from there. Keep me in the loop, because I've still only read All Systems Red to this point, and everyone on Twitter has been saying that it keeps up. So I'm looking forward to it.
Right. We've only committed to reading All Systems Red, but everyone's like, guys, you gotta read all of them. It's like,
I mean, most of them are novellas, right? Like you could just blast through them.
Right. It's almost like the Terry Pratchett formula. It's like, come on, guys. They're really short. You could read a whole bunch of them. There's a bunch out there. Give them a shot.
So yeah, did y'all split up over a bunch of different readings, or this is the kind of book that you could just sit down and read in an afternoon or something if you were really dedicated to it? I kind of split up over a few days. How did y'all do it?
I am queen of procrastination, as I've said on Twitter.
Trademarked.
Yes, trademarked. So I read it yesterday, all in one sitting.
I read it over the course of 2 days, which was really, I didn't have time to finish it and then had to immediately wake up the next morning and just jump right in because
it was that good.
Yeah, and the pacing is just incredible. I didn't want to put it down.
Yeah, that's something I appreciated about it. I mean, I had to read it over a couple short bursts, but I did appreciate, like, with this novella, it was as long as it needed to be and not like a word longer. You know, we got in Murderbot's world, we got the sense of the character, we got to the end of story, and it was, like you said, the pacing was brilliant, and it got us through the whole story, and I just appreciated it. And I guess that's coming off of like also reading Wheel of Time at the same time. So it's like to be going from that to Murderbot's like, oh, okay, I can kind of get this. I know Dylan had pitched this as like, oh, it'll be like a breath of fresh air, you know, take a break from these big epic fantasy stories and take this short little sci-fi romp, you know, along the way. So I very much appreciated that aspect of it.
It's definitely a good break in Wheel of Time, that's for sure.
Yeah, Sarah, are you in book 11 yet, or?
I'm in the middle of book 11. I haven't picked up book 11 for like 2 weeks because I've been busy with other reading. But it's slow, just a little bit.
You're almost there, though. The light's at the end of the tunnel.
I am, and I mean, like, I've enjoyed it. I can't really say that it's been much of a slog except for some bits, but Murderbot was a nice change of pace.
Definitely, I can appreciate that. Another thing that I really enjoyed about Murderbot as a character, and this is the question that I wanted to pose to both of you, Sarah and Lily, is what makes Murderbot so relatable? I was reading this character, and it's literally like this, I guess, cyborg that has these half organic parts, half mechanical parts, and it just kind of wants to get through its day at work and go home and watch television. Like what? Like I just wanted to get did you find this character relatable, and like how relatable was Murderbot to you guys?
Well, I think you just nailed it.
Yes.
The question answered itself. Who hasn't sat at work going, like, trying to minimize YouTube every time their boss walks by, thinking, God, I wish I could just like be home right now watching my soap opera. This is such a waste of time.
Yeah.
But there's also the aspect of the intense awkwardness that Murderbot feels whenever they're interacting with people. And I, like, as someone who is also quite awkward, like, I really related to that. I did pull out a couple of quotes. There's one on page 22 where Murderbot is describing an interaction with, I believe it's Dr. Mensa. All right, she said, and looked at me for what objectively I knew was 2.4 seconds and subjectively about 20 excruciating minutes. And I think that everyone, or at least I imagine that everyone can relate to having an interaction that you know is really, really short, but just feels like it goes on forever.
That's well said. There is definitely this like social anxiety component to Murderbot's character that's super relatable. She's talking to people and she's like, "Man, I wish I could just throw my or I don't know what gender Murderbot is. For some reason, it was she popped in my head. But do we know the gender? Does Murderbot have a gender? I don't think so.
I don't think. Yeah, Murderbot is not or non-binary. Might be the right way to phrase it. The only Murderbot's referred to as an it by a lot of the folks in the story, and Murderbot does not refer to themselves by any.
I think that the characters in the story outside of Murderbot refer to Murderbot as an it because they're so used to thinking of these sec units as unthinking machines, like just computers without personality, without feelings.
Yeah, and from the perspective of that social anxiety too, I was thinking that in a lot of ways, Murderbot seems to use that. We can talk about how like arbitrary the distinction might be between Murderbot and some of the other not fully human characters in here, and also like Murderbot almost leans on the fact that other people distinguish between sec units and other like cyborg type folks by like being like, oh no, like I'm just a Murderbot, I'm just a robot, and where's the armor? And I really thought there's a lot of these quotes in here. Even toward the end, we get this like, I would have to leave the armor behind quote as kind of when Murderbot is thinking through, like should I stick around or should I leave with these humans? And a big thing throughout is I think the armor is like this literalized metaphor of like a thing that keeps Murderbot separate from the other characters. And it's like a crutch in a lot of ways, I think, for Murderbot, where when they don't have to show their face, they don't have to show their actual organic, like gushy, vulnerable human side. It's safer and it's easier. And this thing that keeps Murderbot like looking different from these other cyborg type characters also, and like the way that Murderbot's role is different from some of these other characters, it seems to make like it makes Murderbot able to stay in their like safety of like, oh no, I'm not actually organic like you all, but underneath it, Murderbot has very, very real feelings and social anxiety and awkwardness and all this kind of stuff that is so relatable as you were talking about, Charles.
Murderbot also uses it as sort of a privacy shield. Which is, I think, basically what you were getting at, Dylan. When I'm trying not to call them a she also. I don't know why that is, but I was catching myself as well. At some point, Murderbot is interacting with humans without the shield or without the helmet and gets so upset that the scientists, can see Murderbot's reactions, because normally they can make whatever reaction they feel like and no one can tell. But that sort of exposure was very violating for them, which was interesting.
I wonder if that's going to be something similar to how we feel when COVID is over and we like no one's wearing masks anymore during like social interactions.
That's interesting question, Sarah, because I know there's some parts about this idea of reopening and stuff where it's like, oh man, you got to go back outside and like be in the same room as other people. It's so much work. Like, I just want to kind of close the door and watch Sanctuary Moon all day. You know, it's like I don't necessarily need to be out there mingling with people.
Well, I feel like you get used to not modulating your expressions,
Right.
like Murderbot does. I mean, Murderbot doesn't have any experience or has very little experience keeping track of what their face is doing.
Right.
And eye contact is a big thing with Murderbot too. It does not like to make eye contact, and it feels awkward when people do. And it's like, I wish I could go back into my cubicle with the visor up and shut down for a while instead of being in this social situation with all these people that try and treat me like a person, but I'm not a person, and I can't really explain to them who I am because I am not sure who I am. And I think, identity is another huge piece of why there's this social anxiety piece, and how these humans treat Murderbot, and how Murderbot's uncertainty is projected as this kind of social anxiety that is captured really well with the character of Murderbot. And I just thought that was a really standout moment. If anyone had anything to say about identity.
I actually read a really interesting article. I was searching for a particular Murderbot quote and came across this article on Tor that was describing the arc of Murderbot as a parallel to transitioning, which this touches a little bit, maybe less on identity than it does on the end of the book, where Murderbot decides to leave because they are still like finding themselves. They don't want to be, they're not comfortable letting other people's expectations dictate what they do. I found the article fascinating.
I agree. I have a quote that I think parallels that, and I think it's why a lot of people do identify with Murderbot in some way, and it's around this, wrapped in this theme of, I guess, identity, where Murderbot goes, "It's wrong to think of a construct as half bot, half human. It makes it sound like the halves are discrete, like the bot half should want to obey orders and do its job, and the human half should want to protect itself and get the hell out of here. As opposed to reality, which was that I was one whole confused entity with no idea what I wanted to do, what I should do, what I needed to do." And I read that and I was like, on my Kindle, I was like, highlight.
that was actually the exact quote that I was looking for when I found this article.
Because I was like, that is such a great parallel to just anyone that's like, oh, there's what society, like the whole I'm expected to kind of fill in society, and then I just don't feel like I fit that, and I don't know what to do. And I think that's why people, quote that first line so much and really rally behind this book, is because it just nails that aspect of human nature so well.
And that's further complicated by the way humans react to Murderbot.
Yeah.
Throughout this book, we're seeing sort of just little nuggets of information for really how horribly security units get treated. I think there's a reference to gladiator games at some point, just really, really miserable conditions. And then you have the quote unquote good humans who at least respect Murderbot more than the awful ones, but they still have their own expectations, like you said.
Yeah, they still treat her like a human, or it like a human.
Exactly. And Murderbot's not a human,
right,
at the end of the day. So even though they do respect Murderbot, they still have their own sort of nonsense that they're assigning to them.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, sort of loops back to why Murderbot at the end decides not to stay with them. It's a gilded cage, perhaps.
I mean, they're pushing their own agenda on Murderbot. They
Even
want
though their
Murderbot
intentions are good, they are still trying to get Murderbot to conform in a way it doesn't want to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you are thinking that Mensa at the end, I guess I got the sense that Mensa was kind of like, yeah, like stay with me while you figure things out. And that was I see why Murderbot was not ready for something like that and wanted to separate themselves and just forge their own path, because, society and the company and all these kind of things have basically forced Murderbot to play the role of a murder bot. Like literally Murderbot, because of messed up things in the past, I think malfunctioning, like killed a bunch of people, and was not Murderbot's fault, but because of the positions that Murderbot was in, thanks to the company and society, like did that and has to live with that. And I think that it's like it was time to just separate as much as possible from the attachments of Murderbot's past and move on and see what happens when you just go out on your own. But I was a little like, but I feel like Mensa could help get you on your feet, and this kind of stuff was not forcing
here's
stuff.
the thing, though. Lily touched on it when we were talking about this idea that the humans, their intentions were always good. They were always nice to Murderbot, but they were treating Murderbot like a human. So there was all these moments where like, oh, Murderbot, you can come sit with us. Oh, Murderbot, what do you think about this? Oh, Murderbot, we want to protect you too. You're one of us. And Murderbot's like, I'm not a human, guys. Like, why are you treating me like one? And that is something that I think a lot of people can feel in their own lives, where someone's trying to be nice to you, and it's like, oh, you can like, why don't you come to the party with us, and I'll dance with you, and we'll drink together, whatever. It's like, I don't like dancing, I don't like drinking. Why are you trying to make me do these things? And then even from an identity level of like, oh, I relate to you, and it's like, but we're not the same. You can't, like, I know you mean well, but because you're not experiencing what I'm experiencing, you can't really like help me in that way. You can't like understand. And I think that's a lot of complex nuance of like social structure is what Murderbot's kind of getting at. I don't know if you guys felt that way about it, but that's what I got out of Murderbot's relationship with the humans.
It's sort of a misapplication of the golden rule.
Right. Yes.
Treat others how you want to be treated, but that's not how Murderbot wanted to be treated. So it doesn't quite work. But I agree that I, as a reader, felt like their intentions were pure.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm sure if they had, had more time together, maybe they would have gotten to a place where Murderbot wanted to stay with them. But as it was, that where the story left us, that wasn't what they wanted.
Yeah,
I would be really interested in finding out. And I guess since neither of you have read any of the other novellas, you wouldn't know. But I really want to know if these characters show up in following novels, or if they're just only here in this one first book.
I was curious about that too. I feel like I'd be shocked if we're done with Mensa. I just think there's more there. You don't think so?
Oh no, sorry. I love Mensa so much. I couldn't contain it. I had to make a noise.
Oh yeah. She's a great character. So yeah, I think they'll be back, but really I have no idea. And I guess I don't know. I'm interested in the idea of the extent to which like Murderbot is actually different from some of the other folks who have inorganic and organic parts too.
Like the even augmented humans?
Yes. So one of the characters is, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but Garathin. You know the one probably. And there's a quote that is one of the characters talking about, it's Overse is talking about how messed up the practice of these sec units are. And Overse says, that's my point. The practice is disgusting. It's horrible. It's slavery. This is no more machine than Garathin is. And I was like, we really don't know yet, I think, with the information we're provided, like how different Murderbot is from someone like Garathin, who has been able to is different in some ways from the humans, but it's kind of found a place among them with his own situation of what's going on. And that's a big thing I wonder is if Murderbot kind of let down that armor, let it go, and stop trying to be stop being wrapped up in this identity of I'm a killing machine, I can't be like them. Could Murderbot eventually down the line come to this place with these characters of yes, I've done some messed up things in the past. Yes, I have organic and inorganic parts, and we can accept and live together with that.
There's a section in the back at the end of the book where Murderbot contemplates just living as an augmented human, and then decides that they don't want to. Yeah. I don't have a quote for that, but
I think that's at the end when Murderbot is walking through a crowd and realizes that none of the people around them know what they are.
Oh, I did
It's-
actually
Right.
find the quote that I was
Oh,
looking
okay.
for by chance. I'd have to pretend to be an augmented human, and that would be a strain. I'd have to change, make myself do things I didn't want to do, like talk to humans like I was one of them. I'd have to leave the armor behind. So I think that
Great
Murderbot
quote.
probably could change, but they just have no inclination to.
Yeah, I think that's a great part about like because there's these humans that have like robotic augmentation to them, which is what that gentleman's name is. I'm not going to pretend to pronounce his name.
Sure.
It started with a G. And then we have Murderbot, who is purely artificial but has organic parts and a complex kind of thought process that's very similar to a human's but is not human by nature. And that line, which is what Martha Wells, I guess, is trying to explore here through the use of science fiction, through exploring the human condition of like, where's the line? Like, at one point, like, how many organic parts do you need to be on the human side of the spectrum, and how many do you have to be on the like robotic side? And then I think she wound up through this thought experiment being like, I don't think it really matters. I think each individual has to take it on an individual basis and figure out who they are and who they want to be, which is why Murderbot was just like, you know what, if like this group has already decided who I kind of am and how I should be treated, and I don't think that that's right for me, so I'm just gotta go and figure it out, which is like a terrific ending in my opinion.
Yeah.
I agree completely,
Mhm.
Charles. I think the question changes from what is the definition of human to does it matter
Yes.
if someone's human?
It's almost like a breakthrough. There's so much science fiction where it's like, oh, I'm a robot, but can I love? Or, it's like,
Yeah.
where's the line where robot becomes human and then we have to shut it off? But this takes that thought experiment to the next level and kind of breaks the mold. And it's like, take it case by case. It's whatever the individual's feeling like, that balance, which is brilliant. It's a really modern approach to science fiction character writing and human condition exploration and stuff like that.
For sure. And that's why I was kind of like, it makes sense. The ending makes sense, I think. Like, I get why Murderbot is not in that place yet. And I guess as a reader, I'm like emotionally drawn to this idea of Murderbot. Like, these humans seem nice, and like I want them all to live together in harmony. And that's not the story that's being told, at least not yet. Like, we've got a lot more story to tell and see where things go. And I guess I want things to end in this place of like Murderbot being accepted for who they are, both with themselves and with the crew, and then them hopefully being able to have relationships that everyone acknowledges everyone's identities and accepts them for it. But yeah, we weren't there yet, and we were still in this place of like everyone's trying to treat Murderbot like they're just another human. So yeah, no, that's great points.
I actually really liked how it turned the trope of found family sort of on its head, because I was definitely expecting there to be that, from the progression that we were given, I was expecting there to be that arc where at the end Murderbot is more accepted and also accepting of what the others wanted Murderbot to become. And even though Murderbot goes from not liking these humans really at all and viewing them as just another job in their chain of jobs to calling Dr. Mensa like their favorite human, they still decide to leave, which I thought was a nice subversion of that trope.
Definitely.
I wonder if what makes the ending so bittersweet is because Murderbot is turning down the ending I would have wanted for me.
Yeah.
I see this opportunity and think, oh yeah, I want to go live with Dr. Mensa on her farm with many partners. Like, that sounds great.
Right? But it's like, you have free will now. You can do whatever you want. And Murderbot's like, I kind of always just did that already. Like, I'm glad you're stoked, but that's very human of you to think that I should be happy about this when I'm still kind of processing a lot. Which,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, and that idea of kind of flipping the found family trope is so true, because it's like you said, we wanted this is like the breakthrough that Murderbot learns to become a friendly bot, but it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. I'm kind of latching on to this thing that you said there, Lily, where I'm like, that was the same experience I was having, I think, as a reader, where I was like, I, as a human reader, want this thing for Murderbot because it's a thing that I would want if I, as a human, were in that situation. And it's kind of part of what makes this so powerful, the story that Martha Wells is telling here, where it's like, no, you human might want that, but that's not what Murderbot wants as a sec unit or whatever Murderbot will come to understand themselves as this story progresses past the point that we've read here.
Well said. Yeah, it's this interesting idea of just Murderbot being like, I really appreciate what you're doing and I love you for that, but I still can't stick around. You know, it's interesting in that way.
Well, sometimes the people that you love don't want the best for you. Like,
Right.
Very true. Or even just what you want for yourself.
Yeah, they're like projecting what they want
Mhm.
for you
Yeah.
onto you, and you're not necessarily down with it. You know, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
I thought it was very sweet that, right, like at the end we find out that the book was ostensibly Murderbot's farewell letter to Mensa,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's sort of the vibe I got,
Mhm.
and that just was very sweet. That was
Yeah.
very human.
Yeah,
Like-
I was wondering, I was going to ask you guys what you thought of that kind of reveal at the end, that this whole thing was a framing device, which was this kind of farewell letter from Murderbot to Mensa.
Well, I think of it as a diary entry, essentially,
Diary.
like sharing a diary entry. That's why I thought, I mean, maybe there'll be a bigger reveal why this is called the Murderbot Diaries, but that's what kind of for me, I was like, oh, it's like an entry in a diary, and here you go. I'm sharing my innermost thoughts with you. And but yeah, curious to hear your thoughts on the reveal.
Well, I always have mixed opinions about first person stories.
Yes, I know. I've listened to your show, and you brought it up multiple times, and I cracked the cover of this book. I was like, oh.
It's like, first word is I. No.
But I think this is an example where that was chosen very thoughtfully. And this book being told in first person is necessary for the story to be what it is, for us to really understand what Murderbot is going through, and having that as an explanation, an in-world explanation for why this story exists. I appreciate it immensely from my weird biased side.
Yeah, it's high praise. Because you guys have released like 4 episodes, and maybe 3 of them you've said that the first person was a bit of a pet peeve. So I'm happy that you at least are behind it for Murderbot. That's great. High praise.
I find I'm just harder on it in general. And so this passed muster.
There's a lot of first person out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so it's almost like the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, I could see why you wouldn't like it, but like, also it's so prevalent that that's a lot of things to not like, which is fine, of course.
It's hard to avoid.
I feel for you. Yeah, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is like, I feel for you if you're like, I don't know, in fantasy we get a lot of these like limited third person rotating POVs, so but maybe still it's like 20 to 30% I would guess might be like that's off the top of my head, like first person. Because I can't help myself, I do really want you to read the Kingkiller Chronicle at some point in your own time and all that.
All of that
committed-
plethora of free time.
I've committed to reading it at some point.
Yes, and I'm very happy about that.
Nice.
And I bring it up here because it is another story that has a framing device that tells you kind of why the vast majority of the story is in first person, that I think might get through to you, Lily.
And I think
If
that's
we can get you to
why
check
this
it out.
story stands out, because the fact that it's told in first person is woven into, one, this whole book is about Murderbot, so we're to get into Murderbot's unusual perspective as a being is super interesting, and then 2, it's actually part of the whole framing device of the story. Like it works on multiple levels, which I think will justify the use of first person more than just being like, oh, I think I'll write this in first person because that it would be fun.
You nailed it, Charles. I need first person to be justified.
And in this case, it's a well justified use. The twist to me, Dylan, I'm curious to hear your perspective because you're the only one here that's read it twice, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I am.
And I was wondering
well,
if
I think so. Anyway.
if reading it a second time, knowing that it was a diary entry, did that was there any kind of Easter egg fun moments for you there, or was it like the same experience?
I think it's like, I don't know. The thing with All Systems Red and Murderbot and what I've read so far is just like I'm in it just for Murderbot as a character and the voice and kind of like the plot always to me just seemed like an excuse to have Murderbot tell us things. So the fact that those things happen to be like, I cared about what was going on with the mystery and whatnot, but to me it's like I read it for Murderbot and Murderbot telling me a thing and telling Mensa a thing, but there's not like these moments where it's like, oh no, like now that you know it's a letter to Mensa, you like this all clicks together. At least for me, like maybe I'm just not aware enough to have picked up on it. But I only like vaguely remembered that it was a thing because what sticks with me for Murderbot aren't like the plot moments. It's like the character and the voice and getting to know Murderbot and their plight. So
for me personally, I mean, I kind of agree with you, Dylan. Like for me personally, I felt that the revelation that it was a letter to Mensa it almost felt like an afterthought. Like it didn't feel relevant to anything that had happened.
Yeah.
And it just kind of was like, I didn't have the emotional reaction to it that Lily, you seem to have had.
I just needed it. That is all.
As the justification.
Yeah.
Those of us who accept first person as just like it's okay, you can do that as a form of narrative, and I'm in. That might not have had the same like oh thank you moment that Lily seems to have had, but it's a nice. I guess it's like I think Charles mentioned this that there's a vulnerability to that we like to see from Murderbot. That's kind of like if it was just Murderbot. There's this weird thing about, and now I'm kind of like understanding your perspective more, Lily, as I think more about it. Is like there's this weird thing that happens sometimes in first person where it's like, where are you now? Like, how are you telling me this story? How many years later is this? Then the story was happening. Should I know that? It's like that stuff is spinning in my head now around like when there's this nebulous first person point of view without that justification that Lily's looking for. So that then I guess like if it was that kind of narrative from Murderbot, there's no payoff of like, oh, Murderbot learned some degree of vulnerability here. And I guess that's
but I don't feel like Murderbot needs to have learned a degree of vulnerability. I mean, for me as a reader.
But my question is, why is Murderbot thinking about this to themselves? That's the question that would come up in my head. Like, why are you explaining this? Don't you already know it? Like, why? What?
Yeah, I guess it kind of helps that now it's contextualized in that Murderbot's explaining it to Mensa in some way. It does help, for sure. For me, I read it and I was like, it's kind of presented like it was a twist, but it's just kind of like a fun way to end the story. It's like, oh, neat. Like, okay, cool. But I was just wondering, I was like, oh, if I go back and look at some of this, is it like more obvious now that it was a diary entry? But it seems like in your experience, that's not really the point of the reading experience, at least for you. It was the character work.
So here's something I was thinking about, though, around this. Like, is it character growth if Murderbot learns some degree of vulnerability, or is it conforming to what humans think of as character growth? Because I guess part of what I was navigating in my head was this, like, Murderbot has these deep like connections to people, but it's easier when it's like fake people. That's a whole Sanctuary Moon thing to some extent. So it's like, I hate having emotions about reality. I'd much rather have them about Sanctuary Moon and things like that. So it's like, I guess the social anxiety and the armor and stuff like that, I did feel like Murderbot is looking for some connection, even if it's not the same kind of connection that people would look for. And like, I guess this gesture toward Mensa, I'm like that. I feel like that is some growth, right? Like,
Well, I
no,
think part of that can be explained with how horribly, like I've said, we can assume Murderbot has been treated by
yes,
people before. I don't know if I would necessarily call it character growth, but it is fulfilling that Murderbot has found people that don't treat it terribly,
hmm
and Murderbot sort of acknowledging that was felt good as a
Mhm.
reader, definitely. But can you really blame someone for not wanting to connect with someone who could at any moment turn on them and say, "Oh, just go jump in a hole and die. I don't care." Like, it's really hard to build a relationship on that.
Yeah, I think it's this idea of maybe the act of Murderbot being more emotionally vulnerable is not necessarily the character growth, but the character growth is that Murderbot wants to be more emotionally vulnerable. And that's the important distinction, right? Because the fact that she's expressing a human quality, or it's expressing a human quality. I will never get over that for some reason. But the fact that Murderbot is like expressing human qualities is not necessarily the breakthrough, but it's the fact that Murderbot was willing to write a like diary entry to another human being, say you're my favorite human being of its own volition. That's the character growth, and the fact that that just happened to express some human traits as part of it is just the nature of being Murderbot, of having these organic emotional components, but not necessarily being human.
I want to go back to what Dylan said earlier. Sorry, completely change of subject.
Let's do it.
I thought it was so interesting when you said, I mean, I agree that the character exploration of Murderbot is, and the voice and the humor is a lot of what really makes this book excellent and sort of the point of reading it, if you will. But I thought the plot was so much fun because it felt so much like those sci-fi movies I've seen 100 times, told from the perspective of their obligatory robot companion. I'm especially feeling like the Alien franchise in this. You know, you always find out that there's the android who may or may not have been on their side the whole time, and the team of scientists up against something that is completely out of their depth, and sort of seeing that story from this other perspective, I thought was really fun. I just also love Alien, so
yeah. And I think
Great
maybe
movie.
some of it is like I'm way more a fantasy reader stuff than a sci-fi enthusiast, and maybe I wasn't picking up on some of these like, oh, they're like, I see what Martha Wells is doing here with this trope, and like threw out its head, like probably completely lost on me, and I was just like, oh, like Murderbot is a very funny and interesting character, like, and that was
Well,
kind of like the thing that just floats through my head when I think about Murderbot. And it's also me, like, it's, you know, like think of Wheel of Time. I mean, Lily, you haven't read that, but Sarah can speak to this. Is like, um, I think has a lot of great characters. It's also very plot focused in a lot of ways, and I
Mhm.
kind of even something like that. I'm like plot, like this part was cool. It's just something I do. I guess
yeah.
is like I don't know. I don't gravitate toward plot. I'm curious to hear from more like. Sarah, you said you're a little more thinking along the same lines as me, like focused on the character here. You are the Dylan of
Yeah,
so
I think
that's to be
that I
expected.
appreciate plot more than you tend to, just in general. No offense,
I do not
um,
take offense to that.
but in this case, I really did feel like the plot was secondary to the character work and just the voice of Murderbot. Um, and how Murderbot, it was less about what was happening and more about how Murderbot was processing what was happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I can't make any comparisons to Alien because I haven't watched it. So
Yeah,
Well,
that's so well said. Oh, yeah. I was
it
just
only says
saying,
good things about the book that you don't have to have that background to enjoy it.
yeah.
for sure. And that's interesting. I was that's really well said, Sarah, about the like it's more about Murderbot processing because and nailed it with the processing.
Turn
As a word
Unintentionally.
choice there. And yeah, so Lily, it sounds like there were a lot of these moments then that stuck out to you as these like, oh, that's basically Alien, but you did this. That was happening for you a lot, or
It wasn't that specific. It was more just the general sort of setup premise of the book felt very
Gotcha.
familiar. It wasn't just Alien either. I also wrote Pitch Black which is another sci-fi movie from a little while ago. Just that premise of explorers or scientists in over their heads and sort of struggling to survive is something that I have seen before, but I've never seen it this way. And so it was really fun seeing it in from a new perspective, which, as we said, is the whole point of the book.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of interesting new perspectives here. Just for a fan of science fiction, this book stands out amongst works of science fiction in that it is so character focused, and that it's willing to take a lot of these really common explorations of themes in science fiction. It's like, what happens when you have these scientists out in the field trying to figure something out they don't understand in an emergency situation, or what happens when you have an android that's becoming more and more human, and then it just defaults back to the character work of Murderbot and explores it all through the voice of Murderbot, which is something I don't think we get too much of in a lot of popular science fiction works, and I appreciated it for that.
To me, it really didn't feel very much like a science fiction novel. I mean, it had science fiction novel aspects, but most of the characters were human or approximating human, in a sense, and the villains were human. So despite the setting, it was all very like human based. So
Yeah.
I really didn't feel like it was that science fiction-y.
We have different definitions of science fiction. That's
Possibly.
Okay.
It doesn't try and like invent all kinds of science and try and explain technology. There's not like star travel. The actual technology that they use is like, cheap and clunky and broken and shoddy work. It's corporate, laziness.
Maybe it's because I felt that it was so character based and all of the characters were human,
Right.
barring
Yeah.
Murderbot.
And that's a big thing for me too, is like I think I've gravitated more toward fantasy than sci-fi, more of this probably bias more than anything, that like fantasy is more character focused and sci-fi is all about like, let's talk about technology. And there is hard sci-fi that does that, but it's really not fair of me to say that. And I'm reading two sci-fi. Well, I guess I'm done with one because it was All Systems Red, but the other one's Skyward, and it's kind of cheating because it's Brandon Sanderson, but like not really known as the sci-fi author as much as a fantasy author. But that being said, like I'm reading two, I think finished with one and reading another very character focused sci-fi novels, and I think it's got all the same things I look for in fantasy, like this greater speculative fiction genre that gives you the chance to tell these kind of stories you wouldn't be able to tell otherwise. And as long as it stays like these books are, and like stays with characters and grounded in that, like, I can love sci-fi. And I think I might reach out to you, Lily, for some of these sci-fi recs that might fit my taste.
To me, science fiction, well, one definition of science fiction has a lot more philosophy. Like we were talking about the exploration of what it means to be human. To me, that is science fiction. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is often attributed to being the original science fiction novel. And that is just all about like, can you create life this way? Like the creator and the created, and is the monster human, like all the stuff that he goes through. And so I think with that lens, this is definitely science fiction.
Yeah.
That's very true. And I'm the same way. Science fiction, I always say, was kind of my first love. I was a big science fiction fan before I was a big fantasy fan. And I think a lot of I stumbled on it the same way. I was way more interested in like the ethical questions and the exploration of the human condition when pressed with these kind of ethical dilemmas that science fiction's able to present. then actually being explained some kind of crazy technology, but that's always interesting too. But it's just another vehicle in which to explore great character work. One of the things that I'm curious to hear your guys' feedback on is this is a science fiction book, and but the technology is kind of shoddy. Eh, like, what did you guys think about the whole idea of the corporation and that they penny pinch and that some technology just half works and the Murderbot's supposed to be this bodyguard, but it's actually super lazy and wants to watch serial television? Like, how does that kind of work itself into the world of science fiction when it seems to be almost anti-science in terms of its technology?
I loved it. I thought it was fabulous because it felt very like reality based.
Mhm.
Who hasn't like heard of a government organization phrasing? Not that the corporation is government necessarily, but like, an organization penny pinching from the chairs to the education modules that the security units get. Like, it just felt very, very based in reality for me.
I agree completely. I think this is a more realistic future. I mean, how many companies skimp on encryption
Yeah.
today? Like,
Mhm.
it's a very real thing, and this is just how it would pan out in space.
Yeah, I'm with you both too. I mean, I think it's part of what makes Murderbot so relatable is having to deal with all this junky, cheap equipment, all this kind of stuff. And it's what makes it so much more about the character dealing with the world than about the world and the technology and stuff. Is like, no, it's like you know what it's like to work for a company that buys crappy equipment, probably, maybe not,
Mhm.
but I definitely know what that's like, and it is really annoying, and it does make you burn out and want to just like say screw it and go watch TV instead, and that's what Murderbot's experiencing, and I love that. It's so good.
Yeah, that's well said. It's funny in a lot of ways because it comes back to this idea of like you can improve technology, but you can't necessarily improve humanity that much. The people that use the technology, where it's
It's a
like,
very Charles take.
didn't you get the dossier I sent you? It's like, oh yeah, I put that in my external hard drive. I never read it. It's like
Yeah.
those kind of
Yes.
things, which are
So
like
good.
so funny. Where it's like that is so true. I have coworkers like that where it's like, hey, like, why aren't you using the Google Doc? It's like, oh, I don't know how to log in or whatever. It's like, I don't know what to do with you. So in those ways, it comes back to that almost relatable nature of this story. It's like, man, this is almost too true in a lot of ways.
Well, and we shouldn't ignore they got a specific package from the corporation. There were high-end packages.
Yeah.
So there is also that
Yes.
element of pay to play, like price tag involved.
Yeah, they're
You
like
know,
they were the
Mhm.
non-corporate. She was the director of the non-corporate executive team or whatever. So basically, like,
Yeah.
they weren't profit-driven, so they got the cheap
Well,
package.
it goes to the lowest bidder.
Yeah.
Was the-
Right.
And so I imagine that this story would look very different if it was told if Murderbot had been with a team that had spared no expense and gotten the best package and all of the lasers and stuff, which I assume would be involved.
Gotta
they
have a
wouldn't
good
have-
laser.
They would have had Murderbot. They wouldn't have had just a security unit to deal with such a like big-
Right.
They would have had because there were these like actual. We don't see any, I don't think, but there were like actual fighter units that are even more murdery, I guess, than the
Yeah.
sec units. So who knows? Maybe they'll come out in one of these next novellas or novel.
That did feel like a setup when Murderbot said, "I'm so glad I don't have to face off against one of those." Well,
Mhm.
Murderbot, I wonder how long
bet.
that will last. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's well said. Yeah, I would like to see the kind of the capabilities that Murderbot has and can do in fighting. It seems to be a pretty terrifying weapon when it's motivated, but the issue is it's almost never motivated.
I actually think that I think that Murderbot is a terrifying weapon compared to like a human, but when you compare it to the other bots, Murderbot doesn't seem that bad. Like its main method of fighting is shoot the other guy as many times as it can before it gets itself shot, which is not really that strategic.
Right.
No. Well, it goes back to the education that Murderbot received was not very strong. So it definitely plays out when the sec units fight each other, that it's like they don't have any of that strategy, like you're saying, Sarah. They just throw themselves at each other, shooting at each other as much as possible, and whoever bleeds the most quickest is probably the loser. And
Yeah.
it's interesting that, I guess, juxtaposed against such a like character based like a story about a like about a cyborg type murder bot trying to figure out themselves, and then there's just these action sequences of them killing tons of stuff. So it's part of, yeah, the book is so unique.
Yeah.
I mean,
What's
yeah.
interesting though is that murdering is not necessarily something Murderbot aspires to do. It's just something that it has the capability to do, but it hacked its governor module. It's not necessarily motivated to just start murdering people, but it can, and it sometimes chose to. And in this case of towards the end here in this rising action where it was trying to protect the team and escape and make it out of that planet. But that's what's like so interesting about Murderbot is it's not, it's programmed for murder, but it hacked its programming, so it's just watching television.
Well, here's the thing, Charles. I thought that as kind of like Murderbot was pretty traumatized by the time when they
Hmm.
actually murdered a ton of people, and that's what kicked this whole thing off, is that Murderbot malfunctioned, lost control, killed lots of folks, gave itself the name Murderbot, and then uh, that's when Murderbot hacked the governor module, actually, to make
And you
this
could
whole
argue
thing
that's
possible.
why
Yeah.
it became part of the cheaper package too. It's like, here's the malfunctioned Murderbot that killed a lot of people, but
Oh, yeah, that's true.
we're not just gonna tear it down. Like, it cost us money. We may as well give it to the people that aren't paying as much.
I might be splitting hairs, but was it a malfunction or was Murderbot given a poorly worded order?
Hmm.
I thought that's why
I don't
they
remember.
hacked the governor module so that they couldn't be given orders anymore, so that they could stop killing people. That was
The
the impression I got anyway.
the way there's a part where basically Murbot says, this is one of the things I highlighted, is it malfunctioned and I lost control of my systems and I killed them, and then goes on to say I hacked it so it wouldn't happen again. And but then Murderbot does, to your point, Lily, kind of say like, that's how I remember it, but it could have not been that way, and it's a very easy narrative to just tell people. So I do think it's up for interpretation.
Mhm.
The I guess yeah, it's up for interpretation. If we take Murderbot at their word that they explicitly said they don't know,
Yeah.
then it was a malfunction. But it easily could have been other things, and who knows, it might be further revealed in these next books.
Well, at the beginning of this book, Murderbot is given an order to let the humans die, which they choose to ignore.
Hmm. That's true.
That's sort of how it starts off, right? With that
I mean,
whatever
they
creature.
don't even recognize or realize at the time that they were given an order to let the humans die.
Right, because they've already
Yeah.
they're already working on saving them and not paying
Yeah.
attention. I thought that was really, really lovely, how just right in the first chapter of the book, it's the Murderbot's agency that has saved all of these people.
Mm.
Like the thing that nobody wants security units to have. And that was a very
That's true.
poetic almost scene.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Well, slight gear shift was something that I found like kind of interesting as we were on this topic of Murbot protecting the humans. Is there's a lot of these, I guess it's in the prose, where Murderbot is like, my humans, I'm gonna protect my humans, that kind of stuff. And that was, I thought, adorable, first of all. And second was, it was like interesting the way that almost like Martha Wells was able to make commentary about humanity. If you read some of these pros count, like literally is like the humans did this, the humans did that, and because Murderbot is literally like separate from humans, you can kind of read these as like critiques of humanity, or you could read it more at the like interpersonal level of like this small group of humans did this stuff. And there's some fun quotes that are kind of these like the humans never think about this kind of stuff, and like that's the way my humans were. It's really fun to read Murderbot kind of looking on humanity and judging them.
Absolutely. The prose in this does so much in such a short book, and I think that's a perfect example of it. Every phrase, every sentence tells you 2 or 3 things beyond just what it's telling you what happens in the book. And it's just so well put together in that way.
Yeah, I love how Murderbot's able to identify what it considers are like these annoying human traits, where the humans are like, where Murderbot recognizes that it's been hacked and that it needs to shoot itself or it will kill everybody. And they're like, no, don't. And it's like, we'll save you, Murderbot. And it's like, oh, it's so annoying. And then it's like, what do you think, Murderbot? Like, come have a seat next to us and fly with us in the cockpit, Murderbot. You don't have to go into your cubicle. And the Murderbot's like horrified at the idea of having to sit in the cockpit instead of in its cubicle. It's like, that is kind of an annoying human trait where we're assuming that Murderbot would prefer to be treated more like a human by sitting next to us as we go on the spaceship ride and being part of the conversation and validating its emotions, where Murderbot's like, oh, this is such an annoying human thing that I have to put up with right now. Where it's like, that is an annoying human thing, I guess. Yeah, it's true. The idea of validation being annoying and a characteristic of humanity, I find to be like hilarious.
I feel like the humans want to include Murderbot to make themselves feel better for not viewing Murderbot as like a sentient being.
Yes, exactly. It's like pandering
well
almost.
Said,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's about them. It's not really about Murderbot. It's like, like I feel like a good person when I say like Murderbot.
So true.
Your feelings. It's like no, like please just let me watch TV.
Well, and that's why Dr. Mensa tells the humans to leave Murderbot alone, right? Because Mensa seems to be the only person who gets it.
But even then, at the end, Mensa's still like, "Oh, you'd be my guardian," and it's like, well, that's just another word for owner. Like Murderbot's not convinced that even Dr. Mensa has learned that distinction yet, and she's still part of that problem, which is the driving factor for Murderbot to go rogue, I should say. But yeah, that's a really great distinction.
Yeah. And it's so tough because I immediately feel myself wanting to like defend Mensa, because Mensa is so like to other people. Mensa is like who could be any
to people, but
nicer,
not to Murderbots,
but not to yeah. And at least
she's
not
trying
yet.
to understand, but she doesn't. She's not there fully, which is what makes their relationship so great. And her trying to help is only putting Murderbot in a more awkward position. Like when a family member's trying to help you and it's like, oh, what if I came over and made you soup or something? It's like, oh no, go stay home. Like, don't come here. You know, it's like that kind of a reality where it's like you have all these good intentions, but it's just making me more like out of place. So brilliant.
Well, they do get Murderbot out of a bad spot at the end. The company knows that Murderbot doesn't have a governor unit, and they don't know what's going to happen to them until...
Does the company actually know, though? Because Murderbot's been wiped from the records.
We don't think that... Did that actually happen?
Murderbot seems to... I mean, I think the narration makes it sound like Murderbot knows that they actually have been.
Oh, okay. Maybe I misunderstood that part then.
Or maybe I did. One of us did.
I don't remember that distinction, but I do just remember that crew bought Murderbot and wiped the record clean and chose to leave Murderbot as it wanted to be with the hacked governor module and all of that, which was doing Murderbot a huge solid. So they did do a lot of great work for Murderbot, and Murderbot is incredibly appreciative in a lot of ways, and Murderbot does have some of that vulnerability that we talked about, which was like the fact that it wanted to be vulnerable towards humans was a huge breakthrough. So yeah, I think that was a really important distinctive moment. And there was a lot of good that came from that relationship. There's just this missing piece that I'll always be seen as this thing that the humans want to make more like a human so they can feel better, and this idea of ownership and these other things that Murderbot just wasn't down for.
I wonder if Murderbot was assuming that they would force them to go with them. Right, Dr. Mensa is saying, here's this option for you.
Yeah.
And so Murderbot assumes they have to sneak off in the middle of the night. What would have happened if Murderbot had just said, hey, Dr. Mensa, could you just give me a bus ticket instead?
And
it might have been
Yeah,
fine.
that's true.
I agree with you, Lily. That's part of my urgency. Mensa to want to be like, I feel like Mensa would maybe Mensa wouldn't get it, but Mensa would understand if that distinction makes any sense. Like Mensa wouldn't know what it's like to be Murderbot going through the things Murderbot is going through, but Mensa would be like, sure, if that's what you want,
I
go
agree.
for it. I'm not gonna try
But
to make you do anything.
I got the impression that a unit that wasn't owned by like a free agent, if you will, had to have a guardian of some sort. Like Dr. Mensa would have been obligated to say, no, I can't let you do that. It's not legal.
I think that Murderbot was maybe sparing Mensa that decision, by running away. It's almost like you give Mensa some plausible deniability in the situation. So I think I'm on Dylan's side, where I think Dr. Mensa would do anything to help Murderbot. Like if Murderbot asked and it was within her power to give, even if she had to go out of her way to do it, I think she would, because I think she generally wants to have an honest connection with Murderbot. And then I think Murderbot's the same way, and that's why Murderbot decided to leave in the middle of the night, because it is essentially asking her to break the law, I guess, or get in trouble or something. And it's just easier to give her that plausible deniability, being like, oh, your Murderbot went rogue, instead of, why did you sign off on having your Murderbot just walk around and do whatever it wants? It has guns attached to its arms, something like that. So maybe that distinction, it doesn't really get explored too much at the end, but I would like to think that they're helping each other out a little bit in the end.
Watch Dr. Mensa come back as the big bad of the series.
Oh gosh, then you guys will have to come back and talk Dylan down a little bit for me. Don't leave me alone on that
one. Yeah, that could. I think it'd be pretty hard for Martha Wells to lose me with the Murderbot Diaries, but that's one way to.
I mean, I think it would be a great plot twist. I think that I think she could do it well. I think she's shown that she has the ability to write well-rounded characters with depth. So I think she could make it interesting.
I think she could too. I think there's this theme of, maybe you going out of your way to be so considerate is actually causing a problem with Murderbot, and you can use that as a way to make Mensa the antagonist. It would be it's an interesting thought experiment. I would read it.
I would read it as well, and hopefully enjoy it. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, guys, any last words, quotes, comments before we wrap it up on Murderbot?
I think we covered all of my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, I don't have any more thoughts except that I'm really looking forward to reading the remaining books in the series. I mean, this was fantastic. And it's been a pleasure discussing it with you guys.
The pleasure's all ours, Lily and Sarah. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having us. This was such a blast.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. I'm so pumped we got to do this. This is so awesome. And yeah, what could be better than doing it with Murderbot as the topic? So
Terry Pratchett.
That will be great. That is such a pro, Sarah, to throw the tease for an upcoming collab over on Fiction Fans Podcast, where we'll do Weird Sisters. Is that
Weird Sisters and
Yeah.
what is it? The Last Wish. The
The Witcher.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yes, we are.
which you guys have already read, but will be a first for Lily and I.
That's good. That's good. You guys have played some of the games, though, right? Or at least Lily, you have, right?
I am slowly making my way through The Witcher 3, so hopefully that can be
Nice.
part of the conversation.
Yes.
Nice.
Interesting. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
we have lots of opinions on Witcher, so that'll be a lot of fun. And you're getting, like, I haven't read Pratchett in so long, so you
And
guys
neither
are.
of you started at a good place. I stand
I
by
started
my
with the
statement.
first
Not a
book.
good place.
Yeah, but that's not a good place to start.
Lots of people think Mort is a good place. I did my research. Charles started at the beginning, and everyone says don't do that with
Oh
Pratchett.
wow,
So
controversial
that's
take.
on-
Start with the first book.
Well, if out in the community, there's conversation going on, and you two had that conversation as well, I think, and it's
Yeah.
like that's not the place to start from what I hear, but a lot of folks say Mort, and I started there, and I liked it. It just did. I want to read more for sure, and it sounds like Weird Sister.
I think Mort is good, but it's not where I would start.
Yeah. Well, that's gonna be awesome. Super pumped because that's one of the bigger gaps in Charles and I is like fantasy. What would it be? Just like what we've read.
Oh yeah,
And
Terry
we
Pratchett's a
wanna
big
get-
gap
yeah.
for us in our like authors that we've read and talked about. So that's going to be a good one. And I am thankful that we're doing that over on Fiction Fans. I don't envy the task, Lily and Sarah, of you guys trying to get us to talk about both of those books in a timely manner, because we will talk forever about both, I'm sure. So good luck.
Maybe it'll be a two-parter. We'll
Now
have to
we're
find
talking.
out.
That'd be
Now we're
awesome.
talking.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And-
Guys, if you like what you heard today, check out Fiction Fans, where you can listen to podcasts, search them out. And then what is the handle that you guys have on Twitter? Is it at Fiction Fans?
So you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You could also send us an email at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Guys, thank you so much for coming on, talking Murderbot. This has been a blast. We appreciate your time and your thoughts on this wonderful novella, Murderbot, All Systems Red by Martha Wells. And yeah, Dylan, some parting words before we go?
Just thank you so much. I'm so happy we got the chance to do this. I'm pumped to go on Fiction Fans and talk about some Pratchett and Sapkowski. Did I say that right, Charles? Sapkowski?
Yeah, Andrei
Yeah.
Sapkowski. Yeah. There
Oh,
we go.
one more parting word.
Yes, more parting words.
Follow
Let's do it.
Fiction Fans on Twitter and Instagram and all that. Sarah's
Yep,
always
yep,
launching
yep.
some awesome tweets. So
Yes, come
And
disagree
follow
with
me
us.
too.
Yes, come disagree with us. My incoherent
disagree.
tweets.
At Fiction Fans.
I think they're
Pod.
coherent.
Me too. I
That's
think
very
they're good.
kind of you to say.
Maybe the bar is low because I'm reflecting against my tweets. So it's like you probably got that beat, but yeah.
No, you guys are at a whole nother level of the Twitter game. I go on and I'm like, I can't keep up with you guys. It's like, it's amazing what you're out there
Was it-
do So, Dylan.
No, I much prefer my job. None of that.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Yeah, no, Sarah, Sarah, you're certainly one of the most fun people to interact with on there. I always have a great time when we're done.
That's
so,
very nice of you to say. It's always a blast chatting with you on Twitter too. So,
Thank you.
And soon we
I
can
wasn't
chat
fishing for that.
semi
but
in
it's
person.
true.
Semi in person. Are you teasing something, Lily?
Well, I meant face to face through Zoom.
Oh,
what I meant to
Yes.
say. That's semi in person. That's as close as I get nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, that might as well be in person for how I think about things.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the same way. No, this was awesome. I'm glad we were able to work it out. Looking forward to coming back in the summer for a Terry Pratchett, Andrei Sapkowski mashup.
Pratchett in the sun.
That's exactly right. Going to check out is it the Weird Sisters, right? WYRD.
Yeah, Weird Sisters.
Awesome. I'm excited. So thanks
And
again.
that episode will be released, I believe, the first week of July. That's not when we'll be recording, but
Ooh.
I think that's when it's coming out.
All right, all right. So
Nice.
your 4th of July holiday, you've got some options of stuff to listen to in your downtime. over at the Fiction Fans podcast. And yeah, this has been great. I think I'm going to play the outro music now, unless we just want to keep the outro portion going longer and longer. I'm happy to do that.
It'll never end. You got to stop us.
Charles, yeah, speaking of things you'll have to save me from is Charles, if we don't get that outro music pumping just in time for his schedule. So this is probably time to get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping. Charles, I give you permission.
Thank you. Let's get it going. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. Fiction Fans here helping us out with this collab on All Systems Red by Martha Wells. Thank you so much to Lilly and Sara for being on. Definitely check them out. If you like what you heard today, we're on the social media world as well at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end on Twitter and at the FTF Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And Dylan, if they wanted to support the show even more and they happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcasts. That's plural. On over to, start by heading on over to that Fiction Fans podcast page on the Apple Podcasts app and scroll down until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, then the optimal number to click to support their show or our show would be 5 of them. If you have a little bit of extra time, then writing a review is a great way to go about helping and supporting. But just listen. Oh, yeah, and go to Friends Talking Fantasy and rate us and all that stuff too. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Thank you to Fiction Fans for coming on. You're all amazing. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.